the system and gain control of the resource or system. So in this case, essentially here we are looking at the situation. Actually, the attacker now becomes like a user within the system. So that means the authentication or access control can no longer prevent this attack. So in this case, we need to distinguish whether this is a legitimate user or like an illegal user. Right? For example, take a simple example. Suppose someone obtain your username password by some means. For example, they may use a phishing attack. They use a phishing website to collect your username password. So in this case, they successfully obtain your username and the credential. Right? So after that, of course, they can log into your account. So in this case, authentication and access control will not be able to prevent the attacker because attacker has the same credential as the legitimate user. So then, in this case, can we do anything? So the answer is yes. We can still do something. Basically, we can use the intrusion detection to discover whether this is like an attacker with credential or this is a legitimate user. Right. So then you may ask, how do we distinguish them? Actually, we will use the statistical method to distinguish these two types of users because essentially, so the way we use the computer system actually also follows statistics, right? So if the behavior of the user is different, so the behavior of the user deviates from the normal profile, like the access pattern or the habit or the behavior of the user, then we can consider this as an intrusion. So although sometimes we may also again have false positive, that means we may wrongly identify a legitimate user as an intruder, but anyway, so we can still detect. So if there is abnormal behavior of the user, if there is abnormal behavior, this may be an intruder, right? So that's why we will use statistics. Okay, so basically the intrusion detection system will monitor the behavior of a user within a system. So in this case, we no longer use the user credential to provide the security because intruder may already obtain the user credential. So we need to distinguish the normal behavior from abnormal behavior, right? So there are three types of intruders: the clandestine, masquerader, and the misfeasor. So the situation I mentioned is the second case, so masquerader. So in this case, the attacker may obtain your password through some means, and then the attacker try to log into the system and then access the resource that is allowed to be accessed by Alice. Right. So in this case, we want to distinguish whether the attacker is really Alice or someone else. Right, so the clandestine, basically they try to avoid the intrusion detection or auditing system. Right, so basically this kind of system, they try to bypass the system to detect or to log the activity. And the last one is misfeasor. So the last one is more difficult to prevent. So these are the legitimate users, but they want to access something they are not supposed to access. Essentially, the last class is about malicious insider. So we have some insider of the company and they want to maybe gain control of the system owned by other users, or gain control of the account owned by other users. Right, so for the masquerader and the misfeasor, so they both have the valid user credential, right? So one actually, masquerader, they may be outsider, but they obtain your password. The second one, actually, they are some insider, but they try to again access other accounts, other people's account. So how do we detect such kind of attackers, right? So that's the question. If they have the user credential, the secret, essentially they have everything the legitimate user have, then how do we try to detect and prevent? Okay, so Besides detection, actually we also can have the intrusion prevention. So intrusion prevention is to prevent, so if once we detect some like abnormal behavior, how do we stop the attacker from accessing the like critical resources or like user accounts, right? So basically, intrusion prevention can be linked to intrusion detection. So later we will see in the architecture of intrusion detection. So there is a notifier. Notifier may notify the intrusion prevention system. For example, firewall is a part of the intrusion prevention system, right? Say now there is some remote login, and then actually the user after remote login, the user performs some like actions, but the actions are inconsistent with the basic profile. So each user will have a basic profile. So if the activities are inconsistent with the basic profile, then the intrusion detection system will treat this as intrusion, then will inform, for example, the firewall. Then the firewall can simply block the communication, block the connection from a particular address. Right, so that's one simple example to show how intrusion detection and the intrusion prevention can work together. Right, so this is some other definition from the list referring to the intrusion detection and the intrusion prevention. Right, so why we can use like a statistical method to do intrusion detection? Because actually Danny, this is one of the person we looked at in different topics, describes 3 characteristics that allow the system to determine whether the user behavior is normal or abnormal. So there are 3 characteristics, so which define the so-called normal system behavior. So first is interactions between subjects and objects follow statistics. So if you collect sufficiently many samples of the user activity, actually you can define a distribution. And then the assumption here is the user behavior will follow a normal distribution. For example, how many times you log into a system, how many times, maybe how long the session is, and then how many files you will process. So usually these kind of interactions between subjects and objects, they follow statistics. Right, so that means we can define a base profile based on the normal activities performed by the user. And then if someone log into a system and then perform some action which is inconsistent with the normal behavior, then we can treat this as an intruder. Of course, we may have false positive in this case. So maybe some user is legitimate, but they perform some action different from their normal actions, then we may wrongly consider this as an intruder. And the second one is a sequence that are likely to circumvent the policies would not be part of a typical sequence of behavior. So what does it mean? It means for a normal user, they will not try to perform some illegal action. So if the user is honest, they will not try to perform some illegal action. For example, they will not try to access some file they are not supposed to open. Right? So if such kind of event happens, someone try to access some resource they are not supposed to access, then we can immediately raise the alarm. So in the second case, we can actually immediately raise the alarm if there is any attempt that will try to violate the policy. Right? So processes have a specification set and a set of allowed actions. Right? So this is basically related to the second item. So basically within the system, actually we have the specification for the process. So basically what the process is expected to do. For example, if you still remember in the buffer overflow, we have a program. Actually, each software program, we have the specification. We have the functionalities performed by the program. But say when you run the program and then suddenly the program opens a shell, then actually this is something abnormal because it does not it is not within the specification of this program. The program is not exposed to, it is not expected to open shell. So in this case, actually, you can also raise the alarm. right? So, and then relating to the second item. So the program is not so expected to, for example, so maybe the program is only expected to process files within a directory, a particular directory. But now this program try to access file outside this directory. Then again, you can basically raise a alarm. So these are the three characteristics that define the so-called normal system behavior. Then based on these characteristics, we can define the models to detect intrusion. Right, so there are two ways to define models. One way is basically to define the so-called whitelist, right? So you define the expected behavior, and then if there is some current, you define a base profile. That's the whitelist. The expected, the profile basically defines the expected behavior of the user. Then if you monitor the current behavior, if it does not match the whitelist, the expected behavior, then you raise an alarm. And the second case is, of course, to define a blacklist. So there are two ways, right? You define what are the bad behaviors. And then, in this case, you try to match. If there is a sequence of actions that match this bad behavior, then you raise an alarm, right? So there are two ways. One is like a good whitelist, one is like a blacklist. So if we have whitelist, we try to see if basically if there is a mismatch between the action and this profile, then you give alarm. But for the blacklist, they define the bad behavior. So if you have a sequence which match the blacklist, then you raise alarm. So these are the two methods that will allow us to detect intrusion. So the first method, we call it anomaly detection. That means we define the base profile, the expect behavior of the user. And then we try to see if the current behavior match the profile or not. If it does not match, we give alarm, right? So this will require statistics. So basically, you can, in the system, actually we have the auditing and the logging system. In most of systems, we have the logging and the auditing system. Like in Windows, actually you can find the event logs, for applications, for systems, and for security. So Windows usually defines three types of logs. One is for the system, one is for the user application, one is for security. Right? Security is separated as a individual auditing log. So in this case, we can basically log the system behavior, the daily behavior. Say you log the system behavior for user for a few months, and then based on that data, you can define the base profile. So we can use statistics. For example, you can calculate what is the mean and what is the standard deviation of a user for logins, a session, a duration, how long the session is, and then other activities. So you can define those statistical data based on the logs, auditing, the auditing system. The second one is the blacklist-based approach. That means we define what is known to be bad, and then if there is a match to, this is similar as a signature scanning in antivirus, right? So we define what is bad. And then if there is a sequence of action which match this bad, this blacklist, then you just raise the alarm, right? So basically, essentially the anomaly detection attempt to define normal expected behavior, but the signature-based approach attempt to define the improper behavior or the abnormal behavior. Right, so before we look at the details, we look at some goals of intrusion detection. So these are some common sense, right? So we want to have we want to detect all the intrusions accurately. So essentially, we want to detect all the intrusions, internal and external. For example, masquerader can be an external intrusion. Someone who has stolen your password may try to access your account. Internal means some insiders, they may try to access or try to take over the account of other people, right? Dynamic in the sense with capable, the intrusion detection should be capable of learning or taking into account the current attacks and the user behavior. All right, so basically that means actually the rules defined by intrusion detection can be dynamic. So nowadays, actually one popular method to use for intrusion detection is machine learning. So this actually is one of the most popular research topic in system security. Right, so if you are good at machine learning, and then actually if you can apply this method in the cyber security domain, in particular in intrusion detection, then actually nowadays there are a lot of projects available for this kind of intrusion detection. So timely, of course, we want to detect the intrusion as soon as possible. That means we don't detect the intrusion until, say, the attacker has left the system, right? And clear and concise, so we want to give the results and the analysis in a clear and concise way. Accurate, so accurate means here we want to avoid again 2 types of errors, right? So we studied 2 types of errors in authentication. And then these 2 types of error will actually appear in different systems. So in intrusion detection here, we will also have 2 types of error, false positive and false negative. Right, false positive means there is no intrusion, but the system flag there is intrusion. And false negative means there is indeed an intrusion, but the system does not raise the alarm. Right. So yeah, as I just mentioned, here we will look at these 2 errors again. And in antivirus, actually we didn't mention, but there is also a possibility that we can have false positive and false negative. Okay, so however, so I mentioned that when we look at authentication, so although we have these 2 types of errors, but the user awareness can be opposite in different scenarios. For example, in authentication, users will be aware of false negative. That means you have the correct credential, but the system denied. In this case, user will be aware of false negative. But in the intrusion detection, actually, users will be aware of false positive. That means there is no intrusion, but the system raised alarm. So in different situations, like in authentication, then user will be notified about false negative, but in intrusion detection, user will be will be notified of false positive. Okay. Now let's look at some details about anomaly intrusion detection. And this also is related to your assignment 3. So in this case, basically we try to define the so-called normal or expected behavior. And then we try to see if the current behavior match this expected behavior or not. If there is a mismatch, then we raise the alarm. Right, so typically we will measure the activities based on, basically you just log, you use a log or auditing system to record the activities of the user. And then you define a base profile based on all the events in the log. For example, you can record how many times the user perform an action and how long each session lasts, right? So this can be CPU usage, number of process, number of files opened, and so on, right? So this can be used to define the normal behavior, right? So here is one example. So basically, if say we log the events of the activities of the user, actually then sometimes actually we can determine whether this is a normal or abnormal behavior. So for example, the first, in these 2 examples, in the first example, this is a typical behavior, a user behavior of a programmer, right? And the second one is the typical behavior of general staff, right? So in this case, actually, if say this is Alice is the first one, programmer, Bob is the second one, the general staff, general officer. However, so if someday, so you identify that Bob is doing some activities according to the first profile, then actually you can immediately tell something is wrong, because Bob is not expected to do compiling, running programs, and so on, right? So we can use logs and use actions performed by users to detect if something is abnormal, something is wrong, right? So we will look at some simple methods. So essentially we will look at there are a few statistical models and methods. For example, we can use the so-called chi-square test. That's some sort of hypothesis test. Basically, you can define hypothesis saying that, okay, this is the correct user, the legitimate user. So this is like the default or the non-hypothesis. Then you can use the statistical method to do the hypothesis testing, whether this is your hypothesis is correct or not, right? But we will not go to that one. That one can be used. And we actually, in this subject, we will look at some very simple method that can be used. So basically, we can define simply the mean and the standard deviation, right? So in this case, we can use this method, simple method, to identify if there is any potential intrusion or not. So as I said, this is probably the simplest method. There are more advanced methods. Like I said, you can use like a chi-square test and so on. But we will just look at the simple, the simplest approach, which will give you some rough idea how it can work. But for detecting like more like complicated or sophisticated intrusions, then you may need to use some more advanced models. All right, so if we just use like some simple statistical method like a mean and standard deviation, we can still do a certain degree of intrusion detection, right? So you can determine, for example, how many times the user will log in. So say usually the log user logs in the morning and in the afternoon. So sometimes the user may reboot the machine and log in maybe one more time or two more times. But that's a normal behavior of the user. Or say if one day you see the user logs in 10 times, then this is something abnormal, right? And also maybe on average the wrong login attempt is maybe every day is maybe once or less than once. But one day you notice maybe in one particular day you notice there are a lot of wrong login attempts. Then in this case you may also raise an alarm. Right, so we can actually based on different methods. So mean and standard deviation is one method that can be applied in some activities, like the login, the frequency, and then the session time, and so on. But some other measurements, actually we call them operational. Operational means actually you can immediately raise an alarm if such kind of action occurs. Right? So if some action occurs, you may immediately raise an alarm. For example, if you have a password failure at login, then you may immediately raise an alarm. But for some other activities, for example, the user logs in correctly every time, then in this case, you need to use the statistical method. Some other method, if say there is an attempt to violate the policy, security policy, then you can immediately raise an alarm. Alright, so now we will look at something related to your assignment 3. So the assignment 3, you will try to implement something related to the next few slides. So basically we can define a set of measurements, right? So you can define, for example, measurement 1 is number of logins, successful logins. Measure 2 is the number of files like you create. Maybe measurement 3 is the number of email you send, right? So you can define a set of measurements depending on the system that you try to protect. So based on the actions available for the users, you can determine a set of measurements. And for different users, you may have different profile. That means that you may have different measurements. So in this case, we can also assign the weight because some activities can be treated more as more important, like more critical than other measurements, right? So you can, for example, number of login, you treat this as an important measurement, you give weight 3, say. But the other event, for example, number of file you create, maybe this is less important, less critical, you can give weight 1, right? So in this case, then we can define the profile based on the measurements. So we can define the profile according to the measurements we define. So the first part is like definition. We define what are the measurements, what are the weights for this measurement, and then you can, based on the measurement, then you can try to log the system event. Like you just log the activities performed by the user. And then you can do the logging for a certain time period. And then you can define what is the base profile of the user based on the logs you created, right? So in this case, you have a user profile, base profile. So the base profile is based on the measurements you define and also the logs you produce for particular users. So after you define the base profile, this is like the whitelist. So this is the expected behavior. Then you try to, if there is an active profile, some active actions, then you try to compare this set of actions against the base profile. So how to compare? You calculate the so-called distance. What is the distance between the active profile and the base profile? If the distance is too far, then you can raise alarm. If the distance is close, then you don't raise alarm, right? So you can define a threshold. If the distance is beyond the threshold, you raise alarm. If it's within the threshold, then you don't raise alarm. So that's the idea, right? So to determine whether there is an intrusion or not, so we may just consider all the measurements together. So basically, any question? Any question? Do you understand the previous slide? What is going on, right? So once you define all those like a base profile and you collect the current activities, actions, then you can measure. So what's the distance? So for each measurement, what's the distance between the base profile and the active profile? So you measure the distance for each measurement, for each event, and then you calculate the sum. The sum now is a weighted sum, because for each measurement you can have different weight. So you add this weighted sum together. You compare with the threshold. The threshold is for the whole system, right? So if you add up the distance, the weighted distance for all the measurements, and the sum is smaller than the threshold, then you consider this as that means the active profile and the normal profile, the base profile, they are close. Then you don't raise alarm. You treat this as normal behavior. But if say the weighted sum is greater than this threshold, then you will raise alarm, right? So this is how we define the how we use this statistical method to detect whether there is an intrusion or not. All right, so maybe I can explain assignment 3 what you need to do. Okay, so in assignment 3, so you need to implement. You need to implement intrusion detection system following the method we just looked at. So in this case, basically, you will need to implement 3 major components, actually. Right, so the 3 major components will do the simulation. So basically, you simulate the events, you log the events, and then you do the analysis. So in the first part, you need to simulate and log the event. And then basically there are 4 parts. The initial input, this is basically how you define the format of the, what is the format of the base profile, what are the measurements you need to you will use to do intrusion detection, right? So this is basically the definition of the system, the measurements and the weights and so on. So the activity engine basically is to simulate the events, and then you produce the logs, right? So basically you can define you can use some statistical method to simulate the event. For example, you can define, say I use statistical, statistics of a normal distribution to simulate the event. So in this case, so you need to basically produce some simulated events, and then you need to produce the logs for those events. So after you produce all the simulated events and the logs for say 30 days, then you basically have the basis for calculating the base profile. So after you produce the logs, you simulate the actions and the logs, and produce the logs say for 30 days or 50 days. Then you will have the information that will be used to build the base profile. So the analysis engine is basically to build the base profile using the means and the standard deviations to define the base profile. And then the alert engine is you give some new active profile, active action. Then you compare against the base profile you derive in the analysis engine, and then you determine whether you should give an alarm or not. So that's the overall process. Right, so the initial input basically this will define what are the events and what are the weight for each event. Right, so basically here is a simple example. So in the event.txt, you define what are the events you will log. These events are corresponding to the measurements you will try to use to detect intrusion. Right. So here you first define what are the number of events, 5 events. So this one is the number of logging. This is the session time. This is emails you send, emails you open, emails you delete. So we try to define all the events related to server, email system, right? So basically now in each line it will have the following format. So first, what is the event name? Then whether this is a continuous or discrete event, because login, emails, number of emails sent, these are all discrete events because you only have integer, right? So you log in 1 time, 2 times, you don't have login 1.5 times, right? But for time online, it can be a continuous event, you have 30 minutes, maybe 100 minutes and so on. So or 12.5 minutes and so on. So in this case, the time online will be a continuous event, and then you can have the what's the minimum possible value, right? For all these events, the minimum possible value is 0, and then what's the maximum possible value, right? So some of them actually you don't need to define a maximum. For example, number of emails received or sent, actually there may not be a maximum, so you can just skip the maximum in that case. Some of them will have the natural maximum value. For example, the time online, it cannot exceed 1 day, right? So each day the session time actually will have a cap, a limit. So you need to, in this case, you can define the maximum. And the last one is weight. Basically, we will determine the importance of each measurement, so the weight. Because later when we calculate the distance, the overall distance, we will use the weighted sum of the individual distance. Right, so this is basically the events.txt. Then you need to simulate the event, right? So because the first part, actually you will need to run a simulation algorithm to simulate the daily events, for maybe 30 days or 40 days and so on. So how to simulate? So basically you can define some statistical file that will be used as your basis for simulation, right? So you can give a statistical file. So this gives expected, actually the expected event that you try to simulate. So in the real, of course, when you do simulation, you do not follow exactly same numbers. So you can deviate a little bit. So you need to basically find a way to simulate the event that will be following this statistical file. For example, here the logging is 4, the standard deviation is 1.5. So this mean is 4, logging is 1.5. Then actually you may simulate the event first day. In the first day, maybe the user logging 3 times. Second day, logging 5 times. Third day, logging 6 times. Fourth day, the user logging 4 times. So you need to write a program that can simulate the events according to this statistical. So you can try to search on internet how to simulate a normal events corresponding to a normal distribution. There are some, you can find some example code. Maybe later if I can find some, maybe I will also post on the Moodle site, so to give you some idea how to simulate. So basically you need to simulate some events that will be, because if you randomly simulate the events, then actually this does not follow the principle. Basically, the principle is that the user actually will have some expected behavior. So when you simulate the events, you simulate the event of a normal user based on the expected behavior. So this essentially defines the expected behavior of a user. So then you try to simulate the normal activities based on this expected behavior. Right? So you need to simulate, for example, so you don't need to, so for every day, the logs, so you need to write, for example, Alice logs in, right? So at a particular time. So for example, day 1, at 8:30, Alice login, and then maybe at 8:45, Alice open the email, 8:46, then Alice send the email, right? So you need to simulate the events, and then after you perform all the simulation, all the logs, then actually eventually for the daily total, at the end of the day, when you count the daily total, it should be somehow consistent with the profile here. So it may not be exactly the same, but it should be consistent, right? So maybe Alice logs in 3 times, maybe at 8:30, maybe 1:30, maybe 3 o'clock. So, or Alice may log in 5 times. So basically you need to find a way that can simulate the events in the logs, which will be consistent, somehow consistent with the information given here. So that's what you need to do in the simulation, right? So basically statistic here will define basically the mean and standard deviation. So very simple statistical values. So this is basically the definition. What are the events and what is the statistical information you will use in the simulation. Then you need to write a program to simulate the events for individual days. Maybe you simulate 30 days, 40 days, and so on. You need to simulate. So you give if you give a date in your program. So I think here if you give the events. So this is where the events are then defined, and then give the statistic information, which is the basis of your simulation, and you give the number of days. Then basically the first engine will produce the logs for that many of days. So day 1, you produce the logs, at 8:35, Alice log in, at 8:45, Alice maybe log out, and at 9 o'clock, Alice logs in again, and so you need to simulate those events, and then for the mean and standard deviation of this event, it should be consistent with the statistical information provided. That means because we assume when we calculate when we generate the logs and generate a base profile, actually those information are consistent with the particular user. So the particular user actually is the behavior is defined here. So when you simulate the logs should be consistent. So the content, the data, the values may not be exactly the same. But when you actually simulate those events. Later, when you calculate the statistical information, it should be close to this one. It may not be identical, but it should be close, right? So this is basically what you need to do in the simulation. You simulate the events and then produce the logs. So the analysis engine basically is to calculate the mean and the standard deviation. Now for the number of days you simulated. For example, for the 30 days, you simulate for each day the events, and then you can, based on the simulated data, you calculate the expected, the mean and standard deviation. So as I said, the result produced here should be somehow consistent with this one. May not be exactly the same, but should be somehow close to this one. Maybe here logging is like a 4.2, 4.5. Maybe here is 1.6, 1.7, and so on. So ideally, it should be similar as the value here, because you use this base like a basis to simulate. Then the simulated event should be somehow consistent with this part. But say if you don't use this part, you randomly simulate, you can still produce a base profile, right? So that means actually, even if you did not you fail to simulate the event based on the statistics, you eventually still can calculate the base profile. So even if you don't use this one to simulate the logs, the event, then eventually in the second phase you can still generate a base profile, right? But if say you indeed follow the statistics, then the base profile you calculated in the analysis engine will be close to what you used for simulation, right? Because if you simulate the events consistently with distribution, then when you calculate, this is like the theoretical distribution, and then this is your experiment, and then you calculate the statistics for the experiment. So the experiment statistic should be close to the theoretical one if you indeed follow the theoretical distribution. However, it can be somehow there can be some difference, but it should be overall consistent, because this is basically an experiment, and then the statistic for the experiment. And the experiment, actually, you use some theoretical distribution to simulate, right? So, as I said, even if you do not follow the theoretical distribution, you should still be able to produce the base profile based on your experiment. Because as far as you have the logs, you have the experiment, you can always calculate a base profile. So that's what you need to do in second task. So in the third task is to compare the current activity against the base profile in the second phase. Second phase you have a base profile. Third phase, now we try to simulate some real-time event. And then we try to see whether the real-time event is intrusion or not based on the base profile in phase 2. Right, so how to simulate the real live data, the real activity? You can use the same method you use in phase 1. So you can define a different statistical file. For example, you have this theoretical profile used to do the simulation in the phase 2. In phase 3, actually you can provide a different profile, and then you can use the same method, but using a different theoretical distribution to simulate some event. For example, in the phase 3, you may try to use here logging, you try to change this to 5, standard deviation you change to 3. So in this case, so if you use a different theoretical distribution to do the simulation again, you will still simulate activities which will be different from the previous ones. Right? So if you after you do the simulation, now you have the live data, basically the actual or the current activities, right? So the current activity, you can use the same method used in phase 1, but you can use a different theoretical distribution. I mean, so for example, you define a different theoretical distribution for intruder, and then you simulate the activity for that intruder based on this different theoretical distribution. So now after you get the statistics for the current live data, the current activity, you can compare against the base profile. So how to compare the against the base profile? You use this method. You calculate the distance for each individual measurement, and then you calculate the sum of the weighted individual distance. You compare against the threshold. So if say the overall value is below the threshold, you don't raise alarm. But if it's above the threshold, you raise alarm, right? So here I shows how some example how to calculate for each individual measurement, how to calculate the contribution in the total value, right? So suppose in the base profile, so after you do the second phase, you have the base profile, right? See, in the base profile, the number of logging, the mean is 4, standard deviation is 1.5. Suppose this is what you get in the base profile after you do the second part, the analysis engine. All right, so now for the active data, you simulate in phase 3. Suppose you now you get 1 login. So you actively simulate the current behavior of a user. Maybe this is a normal user, maybe an intruder. So in this case, you get like 1 login, and then so if you get 1 login, compare with the expected 4 logins, the difference is 3, right? So the difference between you get 1 in 1 day for the active profile, you get 1 login, but the expected value actually is 4. That means the difference is 3, right? So 3 actually is 2 times of the standard deviation, right? So basically 4 minus 1, you get 3. That means the difference between the active and the expected logging, the number of logging, actually is 3. 3 is 2 times of the standard deviation. That means for this particular event, the distance is 2. We just use how many times the difference is over the standard deviation, right? So if you have 4 and 1, then 4 minus 1, that's the difference. The difference is 3. So the deviation is 3. So the expected value and the current active value, the deviation is 3. 3 is 2 times of the standard deviation, right? So that's why we get 2. 3 divided by 1.5, you get 2, right? So 1.5 is the expected deviation. That's the normal deviation. But now the deviation is 3. That's 2 times of the normal deviation, standard deviation. So in this case, the distance is 2. However, we need to measure the weight as well. So suppose the weight for the logging is 2, then you have the distance 2 and the weight 2. Then in total, the logging event contribute 4 in the sum. So in this sum, now the first event is logging. So logging here, distance is 2 times the standard deviation. So D1 is 2, weight is 2, then the weight for logging is 2, then 2 times 2 is 4. That means for the logging, it's in total contribute 4. And then you calculate what is the total for like a session online time. Then you calculate the total of the you calculate the weighted distance for the email you send. So you calculate all the weighted distance for each measurement, and you add them together. And then you compare with the threshold. So what is the threshold? Threshold is 2 times the sum of the weight. So for all the events, each event you have the weight. So it's 2 times the sum of the weight, then that's the threshold. So if the overall, the sum is greater than this threshold, then you give alarm. If there is no, it's below the threshold, you don't give alarm, right? So this is basically what you need to do in the alert engine. Right, so these are the 3 parts. So in summary, you need to, based on some given statistical information and the definition of the events, you need to first simulate for a number of days the user behavior, the user actions. Say you simulate for 30 days, like the user activities, based on the statistical information given. And then after the simulation, you calculate the base profile based on the simulation you performed. Based on the logs you produce, you can calculate the base profile. Right? So the base profile should be similar as the theoretical distribution you use. If if you follow the theoretical distribution in part 1, then when you calculate base profile, it should be close. It should be close to the theoretical one, because basically in the analysis engine, you are calculating the statistic for the experiment. So if the experiment is performed according to the theoretical distribution, then when you calculate the statistic for the experiment, it should be close, should be consistent. So after you calculate base profile, now you can generate the active profile, maybe based on a different theoretical statistical distribution, right? So you can maybe you use some different data as a theoretical distribution to simulate the active event, and then you compare the active event one by one against the base profile. If say the overall the weighted sum of the distance overall is greater than the threshold, then you raise alarm. Maybe the second day, the active profile for second day, if it's smaller than the threshold, you don't raise alarm. Third day is again bigger than the threshold, you raise alarm, and so on. All right, so you need to basically display. You need to display like the threshold, and then what's the value you calculated for the active profile, and then you need to indicate whether there is alarm or not. Right, so this is what you need to do. So essentially, in the simulation part, in the first part, we are implementing a so-called honeypot. So we will look at honeypot later. Honeypot is essentially some tool that can also be used for intrusion detection. So in honeypot, we try to simulate some real system using simulation. Right, so the first part actually is to simulate a real system using some statistical, like theoretical statistical distribution. We simulate a log for the system event, right? So that's basically related to the honeypot we will look at later in the intrusion detection part, in the later part of intrusion detection. Okay, so that's what you need to implement in assignment 3. So you can form into groups of 2 or 3, and then later maybe I will see if the tutor can arrange a demo in the lab. So in that case, maybe you can demo your program, and then that will be easier to mark your assignment. Yes.
So when do we form the groups?
You can form the group now, right? So. You can form the group after this lecture. Okay, so in the previous definition, actually we haven't looked at the time, the aging of the data. That means we treat all the data equally, but actually in reality, actually the intrusion detection is more complex than what we just saw. Because in reality, we also need to measure the importance of the data based on the age of the data. For example, the more recent data will be more important because the system the user may also change the behavior during time. For example, when the user first enters the company, then the behavior would be quite different from the behavior of the user after 1 year. Right? After 1 year, the user behavior may be different from the user behavior at the beginning of the year. So in a real intrusion detection system, we need to take the age of the data. For example, for all the logs, when we calculate the base profile, actually we need to give more weight on the recent data and give less weight on the previous data. So this will again make the system more complex. For example, you need to define what is the half-life of all those data, and then you need to basically find a formula which can reflect the age of the data, right? So, but anyway, so that's basically some more complex approach. As I said, the mean and the standard deviation is the simplest approach, and in this case, we even simplify this simple approach. We don't consider the age of the data in the assignment, but in reality, we need to consider recent data to be more important than the the old data. So that means when you calculate the basic profile, the basic profile should evolve during time, right? So if the user change behavior, then the basic profile will also evolve and change the value during associated with the time. So that's for the anomaly detection. And the second approach is signature-based detection. So this is similar as signature scanning in the antivirus software. So we define what is bad behavior or the illegal behavior, and then or dangerous behavior. And in this case, if we find some active profile or actions which match this malicious or bad behavior, then we can raise alarm. So this is just opposite the previous case. So this one is based on so-called blacklist. The previous one is the base profile is a whitelist. Okay. All right. So we can use different tools to collect the pattern and then compare against the pattern. So in this case, if we have use misuse or signature-based detection, we need to have a database. So database need to store all the bad behaviors and the sequences and so on. So then we collect the active sequence and compare against the database. Right. So this method is used in different contexts. For example, in a certificate revocation, we also use a blacklist, right? And also in sorry? Sorry? Oh, you mean these two? Actually, we use both. We can use both in intrusion detection system. We combine both. You can define the basic profile. On the other hand, so blacklist can immediately give you the alert. So I mean, if something match in the blacklist happens, then immediately can give alert. But for the whitelist, so you may need to monitor the user behavior for a while. Then you can measure whether there is intrusion or not. Right. So and then in other situation, for example, in anti-phishing, right? So in anti-phishing, actually, so here we don't have time to go through the phishing part, the phishing attack and anti-phishing. And then actually in anti-phishing, we can use also define a database which gives all the phishing site, and then you try to compare. Right? So we can use different tools to collect the pattern, and we can do it for both the host and the network. Right? So we can collect, for example, in particular, this kind of misuse detection is in particular used for the network intrusion. So network intrusion attacks. So some particular attacks, they may follow the pattern. For example, the attacker may first scan the port of different ports of a system or within a network. Then this kind of scanning will be followed by some particular packet. So in this case, for example, if say you first have a port scanning, so actually the firewall actually can also do part of this monitoring job. So if you have a port scanning and then you followed by some particular packet for a particular port, and then in this case you can identify this potential attack. Then you can simply the firewall can simply block all the future connections for this particular attack. Right. So then that's for the network. For the system, actually you can monitor. So in this case, basically, how to define the bad behavior. So basically, you can look at the specification, the specification of the software. It will define what is expected behavior of the user or the system. Right. So if something extra happens, for example, just as in the buffer overflow, say if a shell window is a program open the shell window. So in this case, you may consider this potential intrusion. Right? So if the state of the system change from one state to another state, in particular when such a change actually involves some change of privilege, user privilege. In this case, you can basically use this signature-based or a misuse-based detection. For the network, actually, we also have different tools. So So you can detect the packet from the network and then let the firewall do the filtering, right? So this is basically, so we look at some general idea about intrusion detection, and then like the two methods. One is abnormal detection, and one is misuse or signature-based detection. So this is a typical system architecture of an intrusion detection system. And there are some free intrusion detection systems available, and you can later we will see some examples. Actually, you can download those free tools. Of course, the software is free, but the hardware is not free. So if you want to do intrusion detection, for example, for the network, you need to buy some hardware that will be connected to your like a router. That with the hardware will do the detection, and then software, of course. For many free, like so-called free intrusion detection system, the software is free. So this is the typical architecture of an intrusion detection system. So we have the director. So this is basically where we do the analysis. So this we call this expert system. And then we have the agents. Agents basically will collect the information, collect data, and then send the data to the director. Right, the director will do the analysis, and then the result will be passed to the so-called notifier. So notifier, basically the job is to tell either the user or other system in the other components in the system, like the firewall, whether some action should be taken. So for example, if there are intrusion, then notifier will inform the user, for example, and the notifier can also inform the firewall to block some packets, some connections from network. Right, so we have basically like a distributed architecture instead of centralized architecture. Right, so the agent basically will collect the data from the source. Like the source can be your computer, it can also be a network device. So if you want to do both host and a network-based intrusion detection, then you need to install agents in different places. And then this information will be passed to the director for analysis. Okay, so as I said, there are two different types of agents for information gathering. First is host-based. So this will mainly look at the log files, right? So actually, for most of the operating systems, you can find the log files available. So as I said, in Windows we have the event. So if you look at go to the event system event, actually you can look at all the logs, right? So when the system is turned on, when the system is powered off, whether the system actually turned off abnormally, and so on. So like all those kind of events, including the application event, system event, security specific event, will be logged. So in this case, the agent actually can look at the log files, right? And then the network-based agents, they will do the collecting of the information from the network, right? So one particular example, actually, so some network switch, actually they by default, they support some functionality that can be used for this collecting of network packet. So this is one particular example, so the switch port analyzer. So in this case, actually, for many network switch, so you have the ports. So these are not the ports in TCP, right? So these are the physical ports. You plug in the cable, right? And then usually there will be a different port labeled by different color, right? So actually this port, if the network switch, this mirroring functionality, actually this port will mirror the connection in other ports. That means when you can communicate using other ports, then the packet actually will be mirrored to this extra port. Then the extra port will basically, this is like the eavesdropping, right? So you can just collect all the packet without affecting the original traffic. So you still have the original traffic going through, but you now mirror all the traffic to a particular port, and then this port can be connected to the agent, agent, and the agent will do the analysis, some pre-analysis. So agent may not forward all the data to the this expert system. So in this case, actually the agent can do some pre-filtering. For example, the director only wants packets with particular format, right? So in this case, you can, for example, the director or the expert system may only want the packet associated with particular addresses or ports. Then this agent can do some pre-filtering to just filter the unneeded packets, right? And there are some other more advanced tools, of course. So in this one, actually, we only have one port, so to mirror different ports. But in ours, there are some more advanced hardware tools that allow you to mirror individual ports. That means you can have so in the normal like switch-based mirroring, so sometimes you may have packet loss. If there are a lot of traffic in different ports, then you may lose some of the packet when you do this mirroring operation. But if you have a more advanced device, then you can mirror individual port. Right. So sometimes we may also combine the information collected by different agents, by both like the log files and the network files. So even for the log files, sometimes we need to analyze different log files together. For example, in Windows, as I said, there are three main different logs, right? The application log, system log, and then the security log. So we do not analyze them individually, right? So application log is for user application, system log is for system activities, and then of course security log is for security related events, for example login fail, and so on. So sometimes we need to combine different sources to see whether there is intrusion or not. Because if we isolate all these logs, then sometimes we may miss some potential intrusion, right? Okay, so we can have a look at example. So in this case, we'll say Alice will normally log into the system during the day and perform some system maintenance. So in this case, the events will be logged in the system log of the Windows system. Right, Alice occasionally log in during the late evening and write some report. So in this case, the event can be logged by the application log. Right. So actually in Windows you can do the you can specify what kind of event should be logged, like for a particular file or for a particular folder. Right. So actually you can do that. So maybe I can just give an example. So if we have some so you can actually specify. You can specify the auditing. So you can specify what should be logged when someone tries to access this file or folder. So you can specify when Alice tries to read this file, you log this event. When Bob tries to write to this folder, you log this event. So in Windows, actually, you can do this kind of auditing. So this will be put in the, if you remember in the access control, we look at access control in Windows. We have the discretionary access control list. That's for permissions, right? And then the system access control list is for the auditing. So basically, it will allow the user to do the auditing for individual files or folders. Okay, so in this case, so if we have like this kind of logs, one is in the system log, one is in the event log, right? So suppose one day Alice logged in the late evening and do some system maintenance. So in this case, actually, if we look at the events individually, we look at the logs individually, we cannot identify there is a potential intrusion, right? But if say you combine all the logs, you look at the logs together, then you can identify actually something is not usual. So you can identify there is an intrusion. Right, so why do we use agent? Because we can avoid the so-called single point of failure. Because if you only have one entire system for intrusion detection, then if the system fails, then the entire intrusion detection system will fail. But if we use agents, then if one agent fails, then other agent can still work. However, so in this case, basically we have more expensive, like the cost will be higher because we have multiple agents, right? There will be overhead. And the director is basically the so-called expert system that will do the analysis based on the information from the agent. Agent will do some pre-filtering for the events, and then the director will do the analysis based on the events provided by the agent, right? So usually the director is in a different system as the agent. Agents they will be installed on different sources, like the host or the network. Director actually usually will be in a separate system, like maybe in a server. Right? Notify is notify the user or the intrusion prevention system if there is any intrusion. If say you detect there is intrusion, then you need to notify the user, or you need to notify the firewall or other system to perform some action. Right? So this is notify. Right, so basically, if we combine the host and the network monitoring, then we have the so-called, this is basically the distributed intrusion detection system. That means we have a distributed architecture. So it's a combination of host and the network intrusion detection. Right, so now the distributed intrusion detection director will monitor the agents, and then the agents are attached to different hosts in the network. And so now basically the expert will do the analysis, the intrusion detection for the whole network, right? So you have individual agents attached to different individual hosts, and then you also have agents attached to different routers or gateways of the network. And then this distributed intrusion detection director will perform an analysis. So now basically the analysis can be based on the logs from different machines. And even you can combine logs from not just even in one system, in one machine you can have different logs, right? So you can combine them. Now you can also combine logs for different machines. For example, a particular port scanning may be done for all the machines. For example, if you receive a lot of packets, first packet is for address 1 for a particular port, say 25. Second packet is for address 2, port 25. Third packet is another for address 3, also port 25. So you have a consecutive IP addresses and with the same port. Then you can identify this is a port scanning, potential port scanning attack. Then in this case, we can notify the firewall to block all the future packet from a particular source. So in this case, actually we combine the information not from one machine, but from different machines. Right. So this is basically the so-called distributed intrusion detection system. Right. So we can have a director, and then we can monitor different machines. Okay. So intrusion response. Maybe we have a break. We have a 10 minutes break. Then we will look at this part.